clutching a $5 million lottery ticket. I rushed home 2 hours early to save our marriage from debt, only to walk into a trap. My husband was laughing with his lawyer about taking the house and leaving me with nothing. He had no idea the separation papers he filed that morning cut him off from my newly won fortune. I hid the ticket, hit record, and let them all dig their own graves for mediation. My name is Skyla Flores. I am 34 years old, and up until this very afternoon, I truly believed my life was destined to be a quiet, manageable kind of disappointment. I run a small creative agency called Salt Frame Studio out of the cramped spare bedroom in our suburban home. I spend my days designing brand identities and retouching product photographs for online boutiques. It is a grueling hustle that I built entirely from the ground up, pixel by pixel. But to my husband, Colton Reeves, who is 37 and the highly paid regional finance director at a massive corporate monolith called Helix Harbor Systems, my entire business is nothing more than a cute, trivial hobby. He likes to smirk over his morning coffee and call my hard-earned income internet pocket change. Our marriage looks flawlessly picture-perfect to the neighbors on our street. We have the manicured green lawn, the 2 leased cars in the driveway, and the glossy holiday cards sent out every December. But inside these freshly painted walls, the air has grown thick, heavy, and completely suffocating. Every single conversation we have about money inevitably ends with him sharply reminding me who carries the heavy mortgage and who just sits around playing with color palettes all day. It was a Thursday afternoon, and I was completely, physically burnt out. My eyes were stinging from staring at a glowing monitor for 9 straight hours, trying to meet a demanding client deadline. I left the house and drove down to the local gas station just to buy a bottle of sparkling water and clear the fog from my head. The convenience store smelled strongly of stale coffee and floor wax. While waiting at the register to pay, my exhausted eyes drifted over to the bright, glowing plastic display case of lottery scratch-offs. I rarely gamble. Honestly, money is far too tight right now. This is mostly because Colton controls our joint checking and savings accounts with an absolute iron fist, leaving me to cover our weekly groceries, utilities, and my own business expenses with my supposed pocket change. But today, standing under those harsh fluorescent lights, something entirely irrational possessed me. I bought a single ticket. I handed over a crisp $20 bill. I did not expect a single thing to come from it. I just desperately wanted a momentary, mindless distraction from my reality. I walked out into the oppressive heat and sat down in the driver's seat of my used sedan. I kept the engine off. The late afternoon sun was violently baking the dashboard, turning the inside of the car into a suffocating oven. I dug into the bottom of my purse, pulled out a dull brass house key, and began to scrape away the silver metallic coating on the ticket. Tiny silver shavings rained down onto my dark jeans. First came a matching number 21, then a 14. My heart gave a little sluggish, confused thump against my ribs. I moved the edge of the key down to the prize box located directly below the matching numbers. I scratched the first 0, then another 0, and then another. Then the number 5 revealed itself in bold black ink. $5 million. All the oxygen instantly left my lungs in a violent, ragged rush. I wiped the cardboard strip with my thumb, utterly convinced it was a cruel misprint. I checked the serial numbers printed on the bottom edge. I flipped the card over and read the fine print rules on the back. $5 million. My hands began to shake so violently that I dropped my keys entirely, listening to them clatter against the floorboard. A strange, primal sound escaped from the back of my throat, a jagged gasp that quickly turned into a heavy sob. Everything in my entire universe changed in that single, frantic heartbeat. The crushing, suffocating credit card debt I had been desperately hiding from Colton just to keep the fragile peace in our home could instantly vanish. We could finally fix the leaking roof in the guest bathroom. We could finally afford to go to proper couples counseling without him endlessly complaining about the exorbitant hourly rate of the therapist. I could actually save my crumbling marriage from the slow, agonizing, grinding death of deep financial resentment. I wept right there in the hot car with pure, unadulterated relief. The massive, suffocating stone that had been sitting squarely on my chest for the last 5 years simply evaporated into the humid air. I shoved the key into the ignition, threw the car into drive, and sped toward our neighborhood, desperate and eager to share this absolute miracle with my husband. I was arriving home exactly 2 hours earlier than my usual daily schedule. I pulled into the driveway, making a deliberate, split-second decision to park out on the street so he would not hear the heavy garage door violently rattle open. I wanted to surprise him. I wanted to see his face change. I wanted to witness the exact, beautiful moment the crushing burden of adulthood lifted from his rigid shoulders, too. I unlocked the heavy oak front door with excruciating care, turning the knob slowly and pushing it open silently. The house was dead quiet, save for the low, constant hum of the kitchen refrigerator. The late afternoon light cast long, peaceful, golden shadows across the polished hardwood floors. I tiptoed down the hallway toward Colton's home office. The heavy wooden door was cracked open just a single inch. Before I could raise my hand to push it wide open, his deep voice drifted out into the hallway. He was not talking to a regional client. He was laughing a sharp, relaxed, booming bark of a laugh that I realized with a pang of sadness I had not heard directed at me in several years. "I do not care what it takes. You need to stamp the asset separation papers today before 5 o'clock, Colton said. His tone shifted instantly, becoming entirely businesslike, cold, and commanding. "Yes, today. I am absolutely serious. It has to be officially on the county books before my massive quarterly bonus clears next week. I am not letting her touch a single dime of that money." My hand, which had been hovering excitedly over the cool brass doorknob, turned instantly to solid ice. The blood violently drained from my face, rushing so loudly in my ears it sounded like crashing waves. I completely stopped breathing. My feet felt glued to the hardwood floor. "Relax," Colton chuckled darkly into the phone, the sound dripping with pure condescension. "She has absolutely no clue what is happening. Skyla signs legal papers without reading a single word of them if I just tell her it is for the benefit of the house. My plan for tonight is already perfectly set in stone. I am going to pitch her a home restructuring loan over dinner. I will tell her it is a temporary bridge line to free up fast cash for a lucrative short-term investment. Once she signs on the dotted line, I can drain the house equity completely dry. By the time I serve her the official eviction notice next month, she will have nothing left to her name but her little graphic design laptop and zero legal claim to this property." The solid floor beneath my feet felt like it was rapidly dissolving into empty air. My husband of 7 years was not just simply planning to leave me. He was meticulously, legally, and ruthlessly orchestrating my absolute financial ruin. He was going to strip the house of all its value, vigorously protect his own growing wealth, and then throw me out onto the street with nothing. He thought I was stupid. He thought I was blind. He thought I was nothing but a gullible stepping stone. But then, something shifted inside me. The violent trembling in my hands suddenly stopped. The warm, joyful tears I had cried in the dirty gas station parking lot dried up, replaced by something incredibly hard, cold, and sharp forming in the pit of my stomach. I slowly reached my hand deep into my coat pocket. My numb fingers brushed against the stiff, rough edge of the lottery scratch-off ticket. $5 million. A wild, electric, terrifying realization fired rapidly through my racing brain. Colton had just aggressively insisted that his lawyer finalize and stamp the asset separation documents today. He had officially filed the legal papers to aggressively cut me off from his money. But in his arrogant, greedy rush to legally protect his corporate bonus, he had unknowingly severed his ties to my assets as well. He had drawn the absolute legal line in the sand this very morning. I bought the winning ticket this very afternoon. The sheer joy of winning a massive jackpot was entirely gone, instantly replaced by a freezing, calculating fury. The $5 million was no longer a beautiful tool to save my struggling marriage. It had instantly transformed into a devastating secret weapon. My breathing slowed down to a silent, measured rhythm. I did not cry. I did not violently push the door open and scream in his face. I stood perfectly still in the quiet hallway of the home he was actively trying to steal from under my feet, staring through the narrow crack at the man who was currently digging his own deep financial grave. I quietly slipped my hand out of my coat pocket, leaving the multi-million-dollar ticket safely hidden away, and silently prepared to play my required part in his twisted, arrogant little game. I shifted my weight, and the aged oak floorboard right beneath my left heel let out a sharp, agonizing groan that echoed loudly through the silent hallway. The heavy wooden door to the home office swung open before I could even draw a breath. Colton stood there, his smartphone still gripped tightly in his right hand. His hazel eyes widened in a split second of pure, unfiltered panic. The air in the corridor instantly turned freezing cold. My hands moved entirely on a primal survival instinct. I shoved the cardboard square deep into the torn silk lining of my trench coat pocket, pushing it far down until it rested securely against the hem. I forced my facial muscles to completely relax, erasing the horror and replacing it with a mask of exhausted oblivion. I blinked several times, letting my shoulders slump as if I had just trudged through the front door after a miserable commute. The sheer speed of his emotional recovery was genuinely terrifying to witness. The panicked, wide-eyed expression melted instantly into the smooth, polished smile of a loving, attentive husband. He slipped his phone into the pocket of his tailored slacks and crossed the hallway in 2 long strides. Wrapping his arms around my stiff shoulders, he planted a warm, lingering kiss on my forehead. Akio. He smelled faintly of expensive cologne and stale coffee. I was just wrapping up a brutal conference call with a nightmare vendor from the Chicago branch, he murmured smoothly, his voice a perfect octave of practiced affection. You startled me. Babe, I am so glad you are home early. Why don't you go upstairs and relax? I will make us a nice dinner tonight. You deserve a break. It took every ounce of physical willpower I possessed not to violently recoil from his touch. My skin crawled where his hands rested on my arms. I smiled back at him, offering a tight, thin curve of my lips that did not reach my eyes. That sounds perfect, I replied, keeping my tone perfectly flat. I just need a quick shower to wash the day off. I walked up the carpeted stairs, my legs feeling like they were made of solid lead. I locked the master bathroom door behind me, turning the deadbolt with a soft, reassuring click. I sank onto the cold tile floor, resting my back against the vanity cabinet. My chest heaved as I fought back a wave of intense nausea. I reached into the lining of my coat and pulled the lottery ticket out. It felt incredibly heavy now, charged with a dangerous, electric current. I unzipped my worn leather makeup bag, pulled out the false bottom located directly beneath my heavy eyeshadow palettes, and slid the slip of paper into the dark, hidden compartment. I stood up and stared at my pale reflection in the large vanity mirror. My hands gripped the cool porcelain edge of the sink. I splashed freezing water onto my face, forcing myself to breathe in slow, measured counts. Do not blow it. I told my reflection silently. Do not confront him right now. Let him play his hand. Watch him carefully. He thinks he holds all the winning cards. Let him think exactly that. When I walked down into the formal dining room an hour later, the scene laid out before me was almost comically perfect. It looked like a highly stylized still frame from a romantic comedy film. The overhead chandelier lights were dimmed to a soft, golden glow. 2 tall, white candles flickered gracefully on the center of the long mahogany table. Colton was casually pouring a deep red Cabernet into expensive crystal wine glasses. He pulled out my upholstered chair with a theatrical, gentlemanly flourish. As he served the pan-seared salmon and roasted asparagus, he asked about my workday with an enthusiasm that bordered on completely manic. He wanted to know about my current color grading projects, about my difficult boutique clients, about all the trivial graphic design things he usually mocked relentlessly. I chewed my food with methodical, mechanical precision, answering his probing questions with measured, polite responses, tasting absolutely nothing but dry ash in my mouth. As soon as I set down my silver fork, the charming mask slipped just a fraction of an inch. Colton cleared his throat loudly, reaching over to the dark wooden credenza positioned behind his chair. He picked up a thick, heavy stack of legal-sized papers and dropped them right next to my empty porcelain plate. The documents landed with a dull, threatening thud. "So," he began, his voice dropping an octave into that smooth, persuasive cadence he reserved strictly for high-stakes corporate boardroom pitches. "I actually have a massive opportunity that came across my desk today. A short-term business venture. It is a bridge line to leverage some outside investor capital. Incredible financial returns in less than 6 months. I just need you to initial the yellow sticky tabs to authorize the temporary restructuring of our home equity." He pushed a sleek silver fountain pen across the smooth mahogany table. It rolled quickly and hit the delicate base of my crystal wine glass with a sharp, ringing clink. "Just a standard formality." "Really?" he added with a dismissive wave of his hand. "Usually, I would pick up the pen without a second thought. Usually, I would blindly trust the man sitting across from me. Tonight, I deliberately ignored the silver pen. I picked up the heavy stack of papers instead. The document was dense, printed in small font, and filled with suffocating, complex financial jargon. I read every single line on the first page. I traced the thick paragraphs with my index finger, taking my absolute time. Colton shifted uncomfortably in his leather chair, tapping his gold wedding band repeatedly against the edge of the table. "Babe, it is just standard boilerplate legal text," he urged, his tone pitching slightly higher with hidden annoyance. "You do not need to decipher it all right now." But I was already carefully scanning page 4. The dispersed funds from the home equity line of credit were not going into our joint marital checking account. They were being routed directly to a private, offshore holding account solely in his name. I turned the crisp paper and flipped to page 7. The variable interest rate applied to the loan was astronomically high, practically predatory by any standard metric. Then, hidden deep within a block of text, I found the conversion clause on page 12. It explicitly allowed the private lender to arbitrarily convert the short-term bridge loan into a massive, long-term, inescapable debt obligation tied directly to the permanent deed of our house. I slowly looked up at him. The flickering candlelight cast harsh, demonic shadows across the sharp angles of his face. "Colton," I said evenly, keeping my voice devoid of any emotion. "Why are the equity funds being deposited into an individual account? And this specific conversion clause means if your little venture fails. This house carries the entire financial burden permanently. We could lose the property entirely." His jaw tightened so fiercely I could see the muscle ticking violently under his skin. The warm, doting husband vanished into thin air. His eyes turned entirely cold, hard, and utterly ruthless. "Are you seriously trying to audit my financial decisions right now?" he snapped, his voice rising sharply, echoing off the dining room walls. "You do not understand basic corporate finance. Skyla, you play with colorful pixels and digital fonts for a living. I manage millions of corporate dollars every single day. Do not sit there at my dinner table and try to play a hotshot lawyer with me." He stood up aggressively, his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. He towered over the table, his fists clenched tightly at his sides. "I have a massive deadline on this deal. I'm going to take a long shower. I want those yellow tabs signed and the papers sitting squarely on my office desk by the time I come back downstairs. Do you understand me?" He did not wait for an answer. He spun around and stormed up the wooden staircase. I listened to his heavy, angry footsteps echo through the second-floor hallway, followed a moment later by the violent, echoing slam of the master bathroom door. The silence he left behind in the dining room was thick, suffocating, and dripping with unspoken threats. I slowly exhaled a breath I felt like I had been holding for an eternity. My heart was hammering so violently against my ribs, it physically hurt. I stood up on shaking legs and began clearing the dinner plates, moving with quiet, deliberate precision to keep myself grounded. I carried the dirty dishes into the dark, quiet kitchen. As I walked past the large granite kitchen island, a bright blue light suddenly flared in the shadows. Colton had left his expensive tablet charging on the marble counter. A new notification banner sat starkly across the center of the locked screen. I set the porcelain plates down silently into the stainless steel sink. I leaned my body over the glowing glass screen. It was an email preview from someone named Thomas Vance, his lead corporate attorney. The bold subject line read, "Urgent confirmation regarding asset separation." I leaned closer, my breath slightly fogging the cold edge of the glass screen. The preview text below the subject line was crystal clear. It read, "The county clerk officially stamped the final asset separation documents at exactly 8:40 this morning. We are fully legally secured on the bonus front. Please ensure you get Skyla to sign the equity restructuring papers tonight for the next critical step regarding the house." The blue light automatically faded away, plunging the kitchen back into complete darkness. I stood entirely alone in the quiet room, breathing in the lingering scent of roasted asparagus, expensive wine, and absolute betrayal. 8:40 in the morning. He had legally locked his assets away at exactly 8:40. I had purchased the winning scratch-off ticket at 2 in the afternoon. He had built this intricate, suffocating financial cage flawlessly. But in his arrogant rush to destroy me, he had unknowingly locked himself firmly on the outside. I had zero intention of sleeping in that house tonight. While the heavy shower water ran loudly upstairs, successfully drowning out any noise I made, I knelt on the floor of the guest bedroom and quickly shoved a few changes of comfortable clothes, my backup hard drive containing my entire business portfolio, and my essential daily toiletries into a worn canvas duffel bag. I moved with silent, frantic purpose. I crept downstairs in my stocking feet, my heart hammering violently against my ribcage, and shoved the heavy bag completely out of sight behind the large emerald green velvet sofa in the formal living room. I just needed to grab my car keys from the granite kitchen island and slip out the heavy oak front door into the dark night. But the exact moment my trembling fingers closed around the cold metal of the brass doorknob, a blinding pair of white LED headlights violently swept across the large living room windows, illuminating the dark walls. The heavy, guttural rumble of a massive vehicle engine vibrated forcefully through the hardwood floorboards. I cracked the front door open just a tiny fraction of an inch, my breath catching in my throat. A sleek black luxury sports utility vehicle was parked diagonally across the concrete driveway, completely blocking my small, modest sedan from moving an inch. The 4 heavy doors of the vehicle swung open simultaneously. Out stepped my deeply domineering mother-in-law, Vanessa Reeves, wrapped tightly in an expensive gray cashmere shawl despite the relatively mild evening weather. Close behind her was Tessa Lane, Colton's aggressive younger sister, who worked as a highly ruthless corporate litigator for a massive firm downtown. Bringing up the absolute rear was Brody Lane, Tessa's overly confident husband, a loud, incredibly obnoxious real estate broker and amateur house flipper who treated every single building he ever entered like an active, dusty construction site. They marched right up the brick front walkway with an arrogant, sickening sense of absolute ownership. They did not bother to ring the doorbell. Vanessa simply turned the brass handle, pushed the door wide open, and marched inside, forcing me to take a rapid, stumbling step backward into the foyer. Right on cue. Heavy, deliberate footsteps sounded on the wooden stairs. Colton appeared on the upper landing, his hair perfectly damp from the shower he supposedly just took, wearing a look of incredibly fake, poorly acted surprise. "Mother Tessa Brody, what are you guys doing here so late?" he asked, his tone so incredibly hollow and rehearsed it made my stomach physically turn. It was a perfectly choreographed social ambush, specifically designed to corner me in my own living room while I was mentally and physically exhausted. Brody did not even bother to make basic eye contact or say hello to me. He completely ignored my physical existence. Pulling a small, black digital laser measuring tool from the front pocket of his designer denim jacket, he walked straight past me, his heavy boots tracking dirt onto the rug, and moved into the direct center of the living room. He pointed a bright red laser beam directly at the load-bearing wall separating the kitchen from the main sitting area. "We definitely knocked this entirely out," Brody announced loudly to the entire room, the laser emitting a sharp, electronic beep. "We throw down wide plank-engineered hardwood floors, paint that ugly brick fireplace a stark, modern white, and bring in some high-end, contemporary staging furniture. I can easily have this entire property listed and actively showing by the second week of next month. It will absolutely sell over asking price in under 3 days." He spoke with total, dismissive confidence, acting exactly as if I was an invisible ghost haunting a lucrative property he had already officially purchased and gutted. Vanessa walked slowly over to my favorite armchair, running a highly critical, manicured finger over the upholstery fabric. She turned her sharp, intensely judgmental gaze directly toward me, her eyes filled with cold satisfaction. "It is time to finally stop playing house." "Skyla," Vanessa said, her voice dripping with toxic, venomous pity. "We all know you cannot possibly afford to maintain a lavish lifestyle like this on your own. Your little digital drawing hobby is cute. It really is. But Colton works incredibly hard for his wealth. He is a senior regional executive. He deserves a sophisticated partner who brings actual financial leverage to the table, not a dependent weight who constantly drains his hard-earned resources." I felt a sudden, violent urge to scream, to completely lose my temper, and to violently throw all 4 of them out into the street. But the cold, highly calculated survival instinct I had newly discovered earlier that afternoon kicked in with incredible force. I remembered the $5 million ticket secretly tucked away in my makeup bag upstairs. I did not explode. I forced my tense shoulders to drop significantly. I let my voice tremble just a tiny fraction, projecting the exact image of the defeated, helpless, cornered victim they desperately wanted and expected to see. I slid my right hand casually into the deep pocket of my wool cardigan, blindly unlocked my smartphone screen with my thumb, and tapped the center icon to quietly begin recording an audio memo. "I do not understand what is happening right now," I whispered softly, keeping my eyes fixed firmly on the floorboards to hide the fierce clarity in my gaze. "Why are you all doing this to me tonight?" The bait worked flawlessly. The perceived, pathetic weakness fed directly into Vanessa's overwhelming, toxic ego. She simply could not resist the overwhelming, narcissistic urge to boast loudly about her own perceived strategic brilliance. "Do not act so utterly clueless and innocent," Vanessa scoffed, taking a highly aggressive step closer to me. "We have been actively consulting with elite family attorneys for over 6 months to legally protect my son from you. We waited patiently for the exact right moment to strike. We specifically held off on making any moves regarding this property until Colton filed the official asset separation paperwork this very morning. We had to ensure his massive quarterly bonus was fully locked away and legally protected from your greedy hands before we came here to handle the issue of this house." Tessa, incredibly eager to prove her own professional legal value to the family conspiracy, chimed in immediately. She crossed her arms tightly over her silk blouse. "Exactly," Tessa added sharply, her voice echoing in the tense room. "And you are going to make this transition incredibly easy for everyone. I already have the draft quitclaim deed drawn up and sitting in my leather briefcase in the car. If you refuse to sign the equity restructuring documents Colton gave you tonight, we have a complete, aggressive forced mediation script fully prepared. We will legally freeze every single joint line of credit you have access to. We will bury your tiny little graphic design business in so much aggressive, frivolous legal paperwork, you will be literally begging us to sign the deed over just to make the financial bleeding stop." The digital microphone hidden safely inside my dark pocket silently captured every single highly incriminating syllable. they had just freely and arrogantly admitted, on a crystal-clear digital audio track, to a massive, highly coordinated conspiracy to commit financial fraud and legally coerce me out of my marital home. The air in the living room was thick with their smug, suffocating arrogance. Colton stood silently by the bottom of the wooden staircase, crossing his arms, looking incredibly pleased with the brutal psychological warfare his family was actively waging on his behalf. I looked at Brody, who was still actively tapping room measurements into his smartphone. I looked at Vanessa, whose chin was raised high in absolute, cruel triumph. Finally, I looked right into Tessa's cold, heavily made up, calculating eyes. I stopped trembling entirely. I straightened my spine, letting the pathetic, defeated posture evaporate completely into the tense air. I looked directly at my highly educated sister-in-law, my voice dropping the facade of weakness entirely, replacing it with a tone of pure, unadulterated ice. If you are all so incredibly sure you are legally right about how this works, I said, my voice slicing right through the heavy, toxic tension in the room like a physical blade, then just bring your expensive lawyer with you tomorrow. I turned my back on all four of them, leaving them standing in stunned, absolute, confused silence, and turned purposefully toward the heavy front door, leaving them standing in stunned, absolute, confused silence. I walked right past them as they stood frozen in the foyer, looping behind the velvet sofa to grab the canvas duffel bag I had hidden earlier. I also snatched my heavy work laptop and my primary business hard drive from the small credenza. Before anyone could process my sudden movements, I slipped out the heavy front door and hurried to my sedan. Brody had parked his massive luxury vehicle directly across the concrete driveway, deliberately blocking me in. I did not hesitate for a single second. I threw my bags into the passenger seat, started the engine, and drove entirely over the manicured front lawn to get around his vehicle, leaving deep, destructive tire tracks right through Vanessa's prized landscaping. I did not look back in the rearview mirror. I drove for 45 minutes straight, heading far away from the polished, wealthy suburban streets until I reached the grimy, industrial edge of the city. I pulled into the flickering neon parking lot of a highly run-down motel located right next to a noisy interstate overpass. The lobby smelled strongly of stale cigarette smoke and cheap pine cleaner. The tired clerk behind the scratched plexiglass window asked for payment up front. I handed over the green joint debit card tied to the primary checking account Colton and I shared. The clerk swiped it through the old terminal. The machine beeped a harsh, angry tone. Declined. He tried it a second time, wiping the magnetic strip on his shirt. Declined again. Colton had not wasted a single second. While his family was busy ambushing me in the living room, he had either completely frozen the account or aggressively drained every single penny we shared. He wanted me sleeping in my car. He wanted me crawling back to the house in the morning, desperate and completely financially broken, ready to sign whatever predatory equity papers he put in front of me just to survive. I calmly reached into my leather wallet and pulled out the dark blue corporate credit card belonging to Salt Frame Studio. It was a completely separate business account Colton had absolutely zero access to. I handed it to the clerk and booked a room for 3 consecutive nights. I had safely secured my immediate shelter. I barely slept on the lumpy, uncomfortable mattress. At exactly 8:45 the next morning, 15 minutes before the financial institutions officially opened their doors, I was idling in the parking lot of a highly secure regional bank downtown. The absolute moment the heavy glass doors unlocked, I walked straight to the vault manager and rented a small, steel safe deposit box. I placed the winning scratch-off ticket inside the dark metal container, locked the heavy door, and slipped the silver key onto my keyring. The physical separation was highly necessary. I needed to remove the overwhelming emotional weight of the money from my immediate physical person so I could think with absolute, cold, tactical clarity. I was no longer a terrified wife running from a broken marriage. I was a strategist preparing for a massive financial war. By 10:30 that morning, I was sitting in the sleek, glass-walled conference room of Whitaker and Associates. I had spent the early dawn hours intensely researching family law attorneys who specifically specialized in hostile, high-net-worth asset disputes and complex divorces. Dana Whitaker was universally feared in the local legal community. She was a sharply dressed woman in her late 50s with piercing dark eyes, severe gray hair pulled into a tight knot, and a well-known reputation for completely dismantling arrogant corporate executives in open court. I did not waste her valuable time with useless tears or sad emotional backstories. I laid out the absolute, verified facts. I explained the forced equity restructuring papers he tried to make me sign. I described the email timestamp I saw on his tablet, proving the asset separation was officially filed with the county clerk at exactly 8:40 yesterday morning. Then, I placed my smartphone on the polished mahogany table and played the crisp audio recording of Vanessa and Tessa freely admitting to their highly coordinated financial ambush. Dana listened with terrifying, absolute stillness. She did not interrupt me once. When the audio clip ended, she leaned back in her heavy leather chair, her expression transforming into a seasoned predator analyzing a highly vulnerable, bleeding target. "This is a textbook case of aggressive financial coercion," Dana stated evenly, her voice carrying a deep, authoritative resonance. "Your husband and his family have stupidly documented their own malicious intent to commit marital fraud and deliberately force you out of a shared asset, but to completely obliterate his legal position. We need to know exactly where he is hiding the diverted funds and what he actually intends to do with that offshore holding account he tried to trick you into funding." That is exactly when I reached into my canvas duffel bag and pulled out a small, silver external hard drive. It was not my business backup. On my way out of the house last night, I had taken a deliberate, silent detour into his dark home office and smoothly slipped his primary personal backup drive from his bottom desk drawer. I knew he meticulously synced his personal laptop to it every single Friday evening. I thought there might be something extremely useful on it. I told Dana, sliding the heavy silver rectangle across the smooth conference table. Dana smiled for the very first time since I walked into her office. It was a sharp, highly dangerous smile. She picked up her desk phone and immediately summoned her in-house digital forensics expert, a quiet, intensely focused man named Malik Henson. Malik took the silver drive without a word and connected it to an isolated, secure terminal right there in the corner of the conference room. He bypassed the basic administrative password protections with almost insulting speed and ease. Within 40 minutes, Malik was projecting the directory tree onto the large wall monitor. Colton genuinely thought he was a clever man. He had deeply nested dozens of heavily encrypted folders, masking them with the names of highly mundane corporate compliance projects from Helix Harbor Systems. But Malik easily identified them as suspicious dummy files, hiding much larger, more complex data structures beneath the surface. As Malik began the slow, highly methodical process of safely extracting the hidden financial data without triggering any remote deletion protocols, Dana looked at me with a completely renewed sense of respect. "We have a highly solid defensive line right now," she said, folding her hands together. "We can easily block the immediate sale of the house and likely sanction him severely for the frozen joint bank accounts. But I need to know your absolute bottom line. Skyla, what is your ultimate goal here? What are we fighting for?" I took a very slow, deep breath. I looked around the soundproof, glass-walled room to ensure absolute privacy. I did not come here just to save a heavily mortgaged house. Dana, I came here to protect something significantly bigger. I leaned forward, resting my elbows heavily on the table, lowering my voice. Yesterday afternoon, roughly 5 hours after Colton legally filed the paperwork permanently cutting me off from his assets, I purchased a scratch-off ticket at a local gas station. It is currently sitting securely in a bank vault a few blocks from here. It is a winning ticket. The prize is exactly $5 million. Dana Whitaker froze completely. Her dark eyes darted rapidly from my face to the yellow legal pad resting in front of her. her sharp mind rapidly calculating the massive timeline implications. The 8:40 morning timestamp, she whispered, her voice laced with sudden, intense, thrilling realization. Exactly, I replied softly, holding her gaze. He deliberately built an impenetrable legal wall to keep me out, and he arrogantly locked himself on the wrong side of it. But absolutely no one else can know about this. Not his expensive lawyer, not his awful family, not a single living soul. My absolute number one directive for you is to keep this money completely hidden from the public record until the final, decisive moment in the mediation room. I want him to put every single piece of his arrogance, his greed, and his planned fraud on the official legal record before I drop the hammer on him. Dana Whitaker slowly picked up her heavy gold fountain pen. She looked at me, the terrifying courtroom predator fully unleashed and ready for absolute war. We are not just going to win this case. Skyla, she said softly, her eyes gleaming with anticipation. We are going to legally bury him in the exact same grave he so carefully dug for you. Let us get to work. Dana wasted absolutely no time, while Malik continued to quietly dissect the hidden digital ledgers in the corner of the room. Dana immediately set to work constructing my very first layer of impenetrable legal armor. We spent the next 3 hours drafting the incredibly dense paperwork required to establish an irrevocable blind trust. In our state, this specific financial vehicle would legally allow a designated proxy to claim the lottery winnings entirely on my behalf, keeping my actual identity permanently sealed away from the public records and, more importantly, entirely off Colton's radar. Once the trust was established, Dana explicitly instructed me to cease all direct communication with my husband. My smartphone, resting face up on the polished mahogany table, had been vibrating relentlessly for the past 2 hours. Colton was rapidly cycling through various stages of manufactured outrage. The text messages popped up in rapid succession. I am shutting off your cellular data plan by midnight tonight, one message read. The next one arrived 10 minutes later. If you do not walk back through the front door and sign the equity documents by tomorrow evening, I am throwing your expensive monitors and graphic design equipment straight into the driveway. I am locking the studio. His final message for the afternoon was a blatant, desperate threat. Stop acting like a child. Come back and sign the papers or you will legally lose everything. I simply stared at the illuminated screen, feeling nothing but a profound, chilling emptiness where my fear used to live. Later that evening, sitting on the edge of the sagging motel mattress, my phone buzzed with a new message. It was not from Colton. It was a text from Brody. It was dripping with his usual, insufferable arrogance. I have a highly qualified cash buyer coming to tour the property at exactly 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, Brody wrote. Do not make this unnecessarily difficult out of pure emotion. Skyla, be a mature adult. This transition is happening whether you like it or not. I immediately took a screenshot of the message and emailed it directly to Dana. Her response arrived within 3 minutes. She did not tell me to hide in my cheap motel room. She called me directly. We do not cower in the shadows while they attempt to illegally liquidate your marital assets, Dana stated, her voice sharp and commanding over the cellular connection. You are going to drive to that house tomorrow morning. You will walk through the front door using your own metal key. You will not raise your voice. You will not touch a single person. You will simply present the documented truth to anyone who happens to be listening and force Brody to make a massive, career-ending mistake. The next morning, the sky was a bright, painful blue. I pulled my used sedan onto my own street at exactly 9:45. A sleek, silver luxury vehicle I did not recognize was parked neatly on the curb. Brody's oversized truck was idling right in the driveway. I parked directly behind the silver car, turned off the engine, and took a deep, stabilizing breath. I smoothed the front of my tailored blazer. I was no longer the exhausted, overwhelmed wife they expected to steamroll. I walked up the familiar brick pathway and slid my brass key into the front door lock. It turned smoothly. I pushed the heavy door open and stepped into the sunlit foyer. Brody was standing right in the middle of my formal living room, gesturing enthusiastically toward the large bay windows. Beside him stood an older, impeccably dressed couple. The woman was holding a glossy brochure Brody must have quickly printed. "This is an incredibly clean transaction," Brody was boasting, flashing his impossibly white, veneered teeth. "We can easily close in under 30 days. The seller is highly cooperative and highly motivated to move on. You will not find a better deal in this entire zip code." I stepped off the entryway rug and onto the hardwood floor, letting my heels click loudly to announce my presence. Brody stopped speaking instantly. His confident smile completely dissolved, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated panic. The wealthy couple turned around, looking mildly confused by my sudden, unannounced entrance. "Good morning," I said, keeping my voice bright, pleasant, and completely steady. "I am Skyla Flores. I am the legal co-owner of this property, and I currently reside here." The older woman blinked, glancing nervously at Brody. "Oh, we were told the house was entirely vacant during the day," she murmured, clutching her expensive leather handbag a little tighter. I offered her a polite, understanding smile. "I am afraid my brother-in-law here has been highly misinformed, and he is unfortunately misinforming you." I turned my gaze directly to Brody, who looked like he was about to physically faint. "I have absolutely not signed any listing agreement to sell this home. Furthermore, this property is currently the subject of an active, highly contested marital asset dispute. The title is heavily clouded. Anyone attempting to purchase this home right now is buying their way straight into a massive, multi-year legal nightmare." The exact words I used acted like a powerful, immediate repellent. Rich people with cash to spend absolutely abhor complicated legal entanglements. The older man placed a protective hand on his wife's shoulder. The color had completely drained from his face. "A clouded title," he repeated, his voice tight with sudden irritation. He glared fiercely at Brody. "You specifically promised us a completely clean, unencumbered deed. Brody, we have absolutely zero interest in getting dragged into somebody else's messy divorce settlement." They did not even wait for Brody to formulate a pathetic excuse. They turned on their heels, walked swiftly past me, and exited out the front door, pulling it firmly shut behind them. The silence that followed was incredibly heavy. Brody's face turned a violent, splotchy shade of crimson. "Are you entirely out of your mind?" he screamed, completely dropping his professional broker persona. "You just killed a massive cash offer. Do you have any idea how much money you just cost me in lost commission?" I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I pulled out my phone and checked the time. "You cannot legally list a jointly owned property without the explicit, written consent of both parties on the deed. Brody, if you ever bring another prospective buyer into my home without my signature on a listing contract, I will personally file a formal grievance with the State Real Estate Commission and have your broker license permanently revoked by Friday afternoon." Before Brody could even respond, heavy footsteps thundered down the wooden stairs. Colton burst into the living room, his face twisted in absolute fury. He must have been hiding in the upstairs office, letting Brody handle the dirty work of selling the house right from under me. Colton immediately pulled his smartphone from his pocket and dialed the emergency services number. "Yes, I need police dispatch to my address immediately." Colton barked into the receiver, glaring at me with pure hatred. "My soon-to-be ex-wife has aggressively broken into my house. She is trespassing on private property and actively harassing my real estate agent. I need her physically removed right now." I did not run. I calmly walked over to the kitchen island, pulled out one of the heavy wooden bar stools, and sat down. I waited. 15 minutes later, a heavy knock sounded at the front door. 2 uniformed police officers stepped into the foyer, their hands resting cautiously on their utility belts. Colton rushed forward, immediately launching into a highly dramatic, perfectly rehearsed narrative about how I had abandoned the marriage, moved out entirely, and was now returning just to cause malicious emotional distress. He demanded they arrest me for criminal trespassing. The older officer held up a single, black-gloved hand to silence him. He turned to me, his expression entirely neutral. "Ma'am, do you have any official identification on you?" I opened my leather wallet and retrieved my state driver's license. I handed it to the officer. The printed address on the plastic card perfectly matched the house we were standing in. Then, I reached into my tote bag and pulled out a freshly printed, legally certified copy of the property deed Dana had specifically prepared for me that morning. Both Colton's name and my name were printed clearly in bold black ink as equal joint tenants. I handed the crisp document to the officer. The officer reviewed the license and the deed carefully. He handed them both back to me with a small, polite nod. He then turned his attention back to Colton, his tone shifting from cautious to deeply annoyed. "Sir, this woman legally resides at this address. Her name is clearly on the official property deed. This is strictly a civil matter regarding shared marital assets. We cannot forcibly remove her from her own legal residence just because you happen to be angry with her. If you want her out, you need to go downtown and get a formal court order from a judge. Do not call emergency dispatch for a civil dispute again, or we will fine you for misusing city resources." Colton stood there, his jaw locked, utterly humiliated in his own living room. The officers turned around and walked out the front door. I slipped my license and the deed back into my bag. I stood up from the bar stool, smoothing my blazer one final time. I had absolutely zero intention of staying in this toxic house with him. But I had successfully achieved every single one of my strategic goals for the morning. I had completely destroyed their secret, illegal sale. I had successfully generated an official police dispatch record documenting his aggressive attempt to unlawfully evict me. And most importantly, I had firmly established that Brody was risking his entire professional livelihood if he ever tried to help Colton steal my equity again. I walked out the front door, leaving the two men standing in bitter, defeated silence, and drove back to my motel, feeling completely and utterly invincible. It had been exactly 3 weeks since the chaotic morning I reclaimed my space, and the silence from my husband's camp had grown completely deafening. I was attending the Oak Creek Historical Society's annual spring charity auction. Under normal circumstances, I would have politely declined the heavily embossed invitation, preferring a quiet evening at home over forced socializing with the neighborhood elite. However, Salt Frame Studio had proudly donated a comprehensive corporate branding package to the silent auction table to help raise funds for the local library, which graciously granted me a complimentary VIP admission ticket. More importantly, I knew with absolute certainty who would be headlining the guest list. The event was held in the sprawling, gilded ballroom of the local country club, a space dripping with massive crystal chandeliers, polished brass fixtures, and the overwhelming scent of overly expensive floral arrangements. This specific venue was Vanessa Reeves's absolute favorite hunting ground. She thrived in these glittering, high society environments, meticulously curating and fiercely defending her public image as the wealthy, philanthropic matriarch of a highly successful, impeccably decent family. I was standing quietly near the towering champagne fountain in the corner of the room, wearing a simple but elegant emerald green silk dress, casually nursing a tall glass of sparkling water with a twist of lime. The soft, rhythmic hum of a live jazz quartet drifted from the main stage. That is exactly when I heard the familiar, grating, condescending pitch of my mother-in-law's voice slicing right through the elegant atmosphere. She was holding court in the direct center of the ballroom, standing inside a tight, devoted circle of 5 incredibly prominent suburban wives. Her daughter, Tessa, hovered faithfully by her right shoulder, wearing a sharp, tailored designer suit that screamed corporate intimidation. Vanessa caught my eye from across the polished mahogany dance floor. Instead of pretending she did not see me, a malicious, predatory spark ignited in her gaze. She deliberately adjusted her expensive cashmere wrap and actively guided her captive audience of wealthy socialites right toward my quiet corner. She did not bother with a fake, polite greeting. She wanted blood, and she wanted a large audience to witness the execution. Well, I am genuinely surprised you can still afford a ticket to a luxury event like this. Skyla? Vanessa announced, her voice intentionally projected at a volume guaranteed to make the surrounding couples stop their private conversations and turn their heads. Although, I suppose when you have spent 7 years comfortably living entirely off my son's hard work, the deeply ingrained habit of pretending you actually belong in high society is incredibly hard to break. The 5 women in her immediate circle shifted uncomfortably, clutching their crystal flutes, their eyes darting back and forth between us with hungry, gossipy anticipation. Tessa crossed her arms and smirked, taking a slow, arrogant sip of her gin cocktail. Vanessa continued, heavily emboldened by the tense, captive silence of the room. Colton is finally doing some incredibly wise financial restructuring with his life, trimming the useless excess, as the corporate boys say. I understand you are going to be signing the final settlement documents very soon. It is absolutely for the best. You really should just humbly accept what little he is graciously offering you before you end up on the street with absolutely nothing to your name. I did not blush. I did not physically shrink back. I did not raise my voice in a desperate, defensive panic to justify my career or my worth. I simply let my calm, unbothered gaze drift slowly down her arm, stopping deliberately at her left wrist. The bright overhead gallery lighting caught the fierce, brilliant sparkle of a very thick, heavy, brand-new diamond tennis bracelet dangling gracefully against her skin. That is a truly stunning piece of jewelry, Vanessa, I said, keeping my tone perfectly pleasant, warm, and entirely conversational, as if we were merely discussing the weather. Is that a recent acquisition? Vanessa lifted her chin, puffing her chest out with immediate, predictable, overwhelming pride. She had completely taken the bait. It was a birthday gift from Colton last month, she boasted loudly, making sure the society wives heard every single syllable, paid for entirely with a very small fraction of his spotless, hard-earned corporate bonus, of course. My son genuinely knows how to treat the women in his family who actually support his incredible career. I smiled at her. It was a very soft, quiet, deeply pitying smile. A gift from his bonus, I repeated slowly, letting the words hang heavily in the tense air. That is incredibly fascinating. Vanessa, especially considering that exact jewelry store transaction is currently listed as a marital waste expenditure on the secret credit card statements both of our legal teams are intensely reviewing this very week. Tessa's smug, arrogant expression instantly vanished into thin air. Her jaw dropped slightly, and she reached out with alarming speed to aggressively grab her mother's arm, desperately trying to physically stop the conversation. Skyla, do not do this right here, Tessa hissed sharply, her polished corporate lawyer composure completely fracturing in real time. But I did not stop. I did not even raise my voice. I leaned in just a fraction of an inch, maintaining absolute, terrifying eye contact with my mother-in-law. It is just so incredibly strange, I continued, keeping my voice calm, even, and completely reasonable, that so many extravagant diamond purchases, luxury boutique hotel bookings, and high-end downtown apartment leases happened to be charged to a hidden vendor account at the exact same time Colton was sitting at our kitchen table, aggressively begging me to split the household grocery bills because he claimed things were incredibly tight for us financially. The tight circle of wealthy women surrounding Vanessa suddenly went completely, deathly rigid. One of the country club board members, a highly influential woman named Eleanor, who was absolutely notorious for controlling the local social gossip mill, visibly and physically recoiled from Vanessa. Her eyes widened in pure shock. "You are completely delusional," Vanessa sputtered frantically, her carefully powdered face flushing a deep, ugly, frantic shade of magenta. "You are making up absolute, disgusting lies right now because you are bitter, you are jealous, and you are actively losing everything you have ever had." I did not argue with her. I did not offer any further defensive explanations to the audience. I simply looked right into Vanessa's panicked, terrified eyes and delivered the final, fatal blow. "If you truly believe it is simply a lie," I replied, my voice dropping to a chilling, icy, perfectly measured register. "Then when you see him for Sunday dinner tomorrow, just tell Colton to have his attorney read pages 17 through 23 of the Lattice Oak vendor statements aloud in front of you." The silence that slammed into the ballroom corner was absolute. I could practically hear the pristine, carefully cultivated social foundation cracking violently beneath Vanessa's expensive designer heels. Eleanor cleared her throat awkwardly, muttering a remarkably fast, entirely unconvincing excuse about urgently needing to check on the catering staff in the kitchen, and practically sprinted away from the group. The rest of the captive audience rapidly dissolved into the crowd, exchanging wild, knowing glances with one another. The social infection had been successfully planted. They left Vanessa and Tessa standing entirely alone by the champagne fountain, totally exposed, humiliated, and visibly trembling under the bright crystal lights. I did not drag the confrontation out for another second. I did not hurl any further insults or attempt to publicly humiliate them any more than I already had. I had achieved exactly what I came for. I placed my half-empty water glass softly onto a passing waiter's silver tray. I turned my back on them and walked gracefully toward the main exit doors, my posture perfectly straight, as I stepped out into the cool evening air. I knew the psychological dynamic had permanently shifted, for the very first time since this nightmare began. Colton's family finally realized I was no longer a helpless, terrified victim desperately playing defense. I was the one actively writing the script of their destruction. I was dictating the exact pace of the crisis, and they were left completely paralyzed, terrified because they had absolutely no idea how much more of their dark reality I actually held in my hands. The air inside the secure conference room was heavily air-conditioned, yet I suddenly felt like I could not pull enough oxygen into my lungs. Malik had been working silently in the corner for the past 4 days, methodically dismantling the complex digital walls my husband had built. Early that Tuesday morning, he finally cracked the heavily encrypted master partition hidden deep inside the backup drive. He projected the results onto the large glass monitor mounted on the far wall. The main directory was innocently titled Lattice Oak Advisory, nested neatly under a subfolder designated for vendor recommendations. It looked exactly like a standard, mundane corporate file. But as Malik began opening the internal spreadsheets, PDF contracts, and saved email chains, the true, chilling magnitude of Colton's deception flooded the bright screen. He was not simply hiding a secret personal credit card to quietly fund an illicit affair. He had constructed a highly sophisticated, completely fraudulent phantom vendor. Lattice Oak Advisory was nothing but a registered shell company. Colton was actively using this fake vendor entity to systematically launder his personal infidelity expenses and submit them to Helix Harbor Systems for full corporate reimbursement. I sat frozen in my leather chair, my eyes scanning the endless, meticulously organized columns of data. An extravagant weekend stay at a luxury boutique hotel was officially logged and reimbursed under the billing code for executive hosting. A continuous, highly expensive monthly lease for a high-end downtown apartment, clearly intended for his mistress, was fraudulently labeled as regional retention overhead. Thousands of dollars spent on diamond jewelry and expensive dinners were completely written off as critical client development. He was actively embezzling corporate funds to finance his absolute betrayal of our marriage, effectively making his employer foot the bill for his double life. Then, Malik's cursor hovered over a subfolder labeled Residential Equity Drafts. He double-clicked the icon. A highly official-looking financial document filled the screen. It was the exact same preliminary restructuring agreement Colton had aggressively slammed onto the dining room table that night. But as my eyes drifted down to the bottom of the final page, all the blood violently drained from my face. My signature was already resting perfectly on the designated borrower line. I leaned forward, my hands gripping the edge of the mahogany table so tightly my knuckles turned entirely white. "I never signed that," I whispered, my voice sounding entirely hollow in the quiet room. Malik zoomed in on the signature block, magnifying the digital ink until the pixel structure was clearly visible. He ran a quick comparative diagnostic against the other files on the drive. "It is a high-resolution digital extraction," Malik stated calmly, his voice completely devoid of judgment. He lifted this exact signature vector directly from a joint tax return you both filed electronically 4 years ago. He pasted it onto the draft document. The psychological horror of what I was looking at crashed over me in a massive, suffocating wave. He had not just been verbally pressuring me to sign away my legal rights to the house. He was fully prepared to execute a highly illegal, forced transaction. He had already forged my digital signature on the preliminary lender drafts to accelerate the corporate approval process, leaving the physical yellow sticky tabs for me to initial simply as a backup measure to cover his tracks. A fierce, blinding rage ignited deep in my chest. I wanted to burn his entire world to the ground right that very second. I turned to Dana, my heart hammering violently against my ribs. "I want to send this entire folder to the Chief Executive Officer of Helix Harbor Systems today," I demanded, my voice shaking with pure, unadulterated adrenaline. "I want to call the police and report him for felony document forgery. I want every single person in his corporate office to know exactly what he is." Dana did not blink. She reached out and placed her cool, perfectly manicured hand firmly over mine, forcing me to stop trembling. She looked at me with the terrifying, absolute patience of an apex predator evaluating a highly complex hunting ground. "No," she commanded softly, her tone leaving absolutely no room for debate. "If you strike out of pure anger right now, you will ruin the execution. If we alert his company today, he will immediately claim his personal laptop was maliciously hacked by a bitter wife. He will hire an incredibly expensive crisis management firm, invent a plausible corporate cover story, and systematically destroy the digital evidence before their internal compliance department can even launch a formal investigation. We must be entirely disciplined." Dana stood up and walked over to the dry erase board, picking up a black marker. "This is no longer just a standard marital waste dispute," she explained, drawing a sharp, bold line directly down the center of the whiteboard. "This is massive document fraud, and it carries extreme, career-ending professional liability. But we have to choose the exact moment to deploy this information so it delivers maximum strategic value. We cannot give him a single second to build a counter-narrative." She tapped the left side of the board. "We are immediately splitting our offensive strategy into 2 completely separate tracks. Track 1 is your family, your assets, and the house. We handle this entirely within the confines of civil court and the upcoming mediation session." She moved her marker to the right side of the board. "Track 2 is his fraudulent spending records and his massive compliance violations at Helix Harbor Systems. Track 2 is the absolute nuclear option. We will only deliver that specific payload to the exact right compliance officer when Colton is completely trapped and has zero leverage left to negotiate." I took a slow, deep breath, forcing my racing pulse to steady. I understood the cold, brilliant logic of her plan. We needed to let him walk blindly into a room where he felt completely invincible. Dana returned to the table and opened her thick leather binder. "We need to perfectly layer the legal stage for the upcoming mediation," she said, pulling out several crisp folders. We had already discussed the ultimate timeline regarding the $5 million lottery jackpot currently sitting safely in the blind trust. Dana had intensely reviewed the county clerk timestamps and my purchase receipts a dozen times over the past few weeks to ensure our legal standing was absolutely impenetrable. That money was my ultimate shield. But Dana was adamant about keeping it completely invisible for now. She began placing the folders onto the mahogany table one by one, physically stacking our ammunition. Layer 1 is the audio recording of his mother and sister openly confessing to the premeditated financial ambush. Layer 2 is the email timestamp from his attorney. proving he maliciously initiated the asset separation. Layer 3 consists of the lattice oak credit card statements and the undeniable proof of his digital signature forgery. She looked up at me, tapping her gold pen against the polished wood. "Notice what is intentionally missing from this initial negotiation file," she said, her dark eyes flashing with brilliant tactical foresight. "We are completely hiding the trust and the lottery winnings from the opposing counsel. We are going to let Colton sit in that mediation room and arrogantly lay all his greedy, fraudulent demands directly onto the official legal record. We will let him meticulously dig a massive hole, step inside it, and confidently hand us the shovel. And only when he truly believes he has broken you will we drop the final layer." A heavy, aggressive pounding on the thin door of my motel room startled me awake. It was exactly 7 o'clock on a rainy Tuesday morning. A bored-looking process server stood on the wet concrete walkway, shoving a thick, tightly sealed manila envelope into my hands before turning away without a single word. I locked the door, sat on the edge of the unmade bed, and tore the heavy paper open. It was an emergency mediation and settlement demand packet, drafted by Thomas Vance, Colton's notoriously aggressive corporate attorney. The legal language was incredibly dense, but the underlying threat was violently clear. It was designed to completely crush my spirit and force an immediate surrender. Colton was generously offering a so-called fair settlement. The terms dictated that I would immediately sign away all legal rights and equity claims to our marital home. In exchange, I would be allowed to keep my used business laptop, my digital drawing tablets, and exactly 50% of the massive, crippling credit card debt he had secretly accumulated, if I refused to sign this draft agreement within 48 hours. The following page outlined the exact consequences. His legal team would immediately file an emergency injunction to completely freeze the separate business checking accounts of Salt Frame Studio, claiming marital commingling. They explicitly promised to drag me into a brutal, multi-year litigation process designed to bleed my non-existent legal fund entirely dry. Tucked neatly at the very back of the packet was a pristine, ready-to-sign draft of a quit-claim deed, right next to a printed schedule for a mandatory mediation session. The meeting was set for 10 o'clock the following morning at the high-end downtown offices of Vance and Partners. There was also a small, incredibly arrogant handwritten note clipped to the front page. It read, "Relatives are strongly encouraged to attend the session to help support the emotional transition process." It was a blatant, highly orchestrated show of force. Colton was actively inviting his entire toxic family to sit in a polished conference room and watch me financially bleed to death. I drove straight to Dana's office, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my fingers ached. I dropped the heavy packet directly onto her mahogany desk. Dana read through the pages in complete silence. When she reached the final page, she did not look worried. She leaned back in her heavy leather chair and let out a sharp, genuinely amused, ice-cold laugh. Opposing counsel just made a massive, fatal miscalculation, Dana said, tossing the packet back onto the table with pure disdain. They have climbed entirely too high on their own arrogance. Submitting a formal settlement demand this absurdly greedy and punitive is incredibly dangerous for them. If this document ever made it in front of a family court judge, they would be immediately sanctioned for attempting to completely starve a spouse out of their legal marital rights. They are handing us the exact weapon we need to prove malicious intent. But I was not smiling. I felt a cold, heavy knot of pure dread forming in the pit of my stomach. "Dana," I whispered, pacing the length of her office. "I can handle Colton. I can handle his lawyer. But his mother, his sister, and Brody are all going to be sitting in that room, actively hunting for blood. They want to corner me. They want to publicly break me down until I'm sobbing and begging. I do not know if I can sit across a table from all 5 of them and keep my composure." Dana stood up and walked around her desk, placing both hands firmly on my tense shoulders. "You are not going into that room to fight them, Skyla. You are going into that room to give the performance of your entire life. I want you to look utterly exhausted. I want you to slump your shoulders. Let your voice tremble, and look down at your hands. Play the exact pathetic, defeated victim they desperately expect to see. The more helpless they think you are, the more they will talk, and the more they talk, the more they will permanently expose their own illegal conspiracy on the official mediation record. Dana walked over to her filing cabinet and pulled out a thick, beautifully bound legal response. I have already drafted our complete counterattack, she explained, tapping the heavy binder, but I am absolutely not submitting it beforehand. If they see our evidence now, they will pivot. Our sole objective tomorrow is to let Colton confidently place his entire fraudulent ambition right onto the center of the table. We let him officially record his demands. Then, we spring the trap. Just then, Malik knocked softly on the glass door and stepped into the room. He carried a large, glossy piece of poster board. He placed it carefully onto the easel in the corner. It was the absolute masterpiece of our preparation. Malik had finalized a minute-by-minute timeline mapping out the exact sequence of Colton's destruction. The bright red line at the top clearly marked 8:40 in the morning, the exact minute the county clerk officially stamped the asset separation documents. The bright blue line below it marked 2 in the afternoon, the moment my credit card was swiped at the gas station for the winning lottery ticket. Below that, Malik had meticulously mapped out the exact timestamps of Colton's threatening text messages demanding I sign the house away, flawlessly cross-referenced with the exact dates and times of the Lattice Oak phantom vendor charges used to fund his illicit affair. It was a flawless, undeniable visual map of pure financial fraud. I spent the entire evening preparing. I completely discarded the casual, artistic sweaters and faded jeans Colton had always openly mocked. Instead, I carefully laid out a sharply tailored, dark charcoal business suit I had purchased years ago for a major client pitch, but never actually wore. I polished my black leather pumps until they gleamed. I pulled my hair back into a sleek, severe knot at the base of my neck. When I looked in the mirror the next morning, the exhausted, terrified wife was completely gone. The woman staring back was cold, calm, and utterly professional. I was a heavily armored soldier walking willingly into an ambush, carrying the ultimate, invisible shield. I was completely financially secure, and they had absolutely no idea. At exactly 9:45 the next morning, I stood in the expansive, marble-floored lobby of the downtown corporate tower housing Vance and Partners. The air smelled of expensive floor wax and old money. I clutched a sleek, completely opaque black leather briefcase tightly in my right hand. Inside that dark case rested Malik's devastating timeline, the undeniable proof of Colton's massive corporate embezzlement, and the certified trust documents securing the $5 million jackpot that Colton had legally locked himself entirely out of. I stepped into the gleaming silver elevator car and pressed the button for the 42nd floor. The heavy metal doors slid seamlessly shut, trapping me in the quiet, ascending box. They were waiting up there, entirely convinced they were about to witness my absolute ruin. They simply did not know I was bringing the executioner with me. The heavy oak door to the primary conference room swung open. The space was cavernous, walled entirely in floor-to-ceiling glass that offered a dizzying view of the city skyline. At the exact center of the massive mahogany table sat Colton. He was leaning back in a plush leather executive chair, his hands steepled beneath his chin, projecting the exact arrogant posture of a ruthless chief executive officer preparing to terminate a low-level employee. To his immediate right sat his attorney, Thomas Vance, a man who radiated expensive, aggressive confidence. But the most disturbing detail of the room was the audience. Arranged deliberately in a neat row of chairs directly behind Colton were Vanessa, Tessa, and Brody. They were literally brought in as spectators, clutching premium coffees and wearing matching expressions of smug, eager anticipation. They had come to watch me financially bleed out on the polished wood floor. Thomas Vance opened his thick leather binder with a sharp, echoing snap. "Let us be entirely practical today. Skyla," the attorney began, his voice dripping with practiced condescension. We all understand the reality of this situation. You do not possess the financial resources to sustain a protracted legal battle. Your freelance income is highly unstable. My client, however, carries the entire fiscal weight of this household. The most logical, equitable path forward is for Colton to retain full ownership of the primary residence. In return, he is willing to absorb 50% of the outstanding marital credit card debt, leaving you responsible for the remaining half. Vanessa let out a soft, highly audible scoff from the back row, clearly meant for me to hear. Brody leaned over and whispered something into Tessa's ear, making her smirk. I let my shoulders drop heavily. I lowered my gaze to the pristine draft agreement resting in front of me. I forced my hands to tremble slightly as I reached out to touch the thick paper. I spent a long, agonizing minute reading the same paragraph over and over, letting my breathing become visibly shallow and erratic. So, I whispered, keeping my voice incredibly small and fractured. If I sign this right now, I have to walk away from my own home entirely, and I still have to pay thousands of dollars for a credit card debt I did not even know existed. Colton sighed loudly, rubbing his temples as if my mere presence was an exhausting burden. Be reasonable for once in your life. Skyla, he snapped, his tone echoing loudly in the large room. You are walking away with your digital art equipment. You can easily start over in a small rented apartment. Do not make this harder than it has to be. You have absolutely no other viable options here. He picked up a heavy silver pen and slid it forcefully across the polished mahogany table. It stopped mere inches from my shaking fingers. The entire room relaxed. Tessa crossed her legs comfortably. Vanessa smiled in triumphant satisfaction. They all genuinely believed I was broken. I did not touch the pen. I slowly pulled my hands back and placed them neatly in my lap. Dana Whitaker sat perfectly still beside me. She did not raise her voice. She simply reached into her briefcase, pulled out a thin blue folder, and slid it directly across the table to Thomas Vance. I believe your client has been deeply untruthful with you regarding the origin and nature of that massive credit card debt. Thomas, Dana stated, her voice slicing through the smug atmosphere like a frozen blade. Vance frowned, opening the folder. His confident expression immediately faltered. These are the lattice oak vendor statements, he said cautiously. Colton explicitly assured me these were short-term, high-yield investment expenditures. Dana smiled a terrible, predatory smile. They are definitely expenditures, she corrected smoothly. But I would hardly call a 6-month lease on a luxury downtown penthouse apartment for a 25-year-old mistress an investment. Nor would I classify weekend getaways at high-end resorts, expensive lingerie, and diamond tennis bracelets as standard portfolio diversification. That is undeniable. Documented marital waste. The color violently drained from Thomas Vance's face. He turned his head slowly to glare at his own client. An attorney absolutely hates being lied to, especially when that lie is exposed in front of opposing counsel. Behind Colton, the peanut gallery went deathly rigid. Vanessa's hand instinctively flew to the diamond bracelet on her left wrist, her eyes widening in pure horror as she realized the expensive gift she had been bragging about was funded by the exact same illicit credit card debt her son was currently trying to force onto me. Brody looked like he had swallowed a stone. Before Colton could even open his mouth to formulate a desperate lie, Dana moved to the second layer. She placed a small black digital recorder onto the center of the table and pressed a single button. The crisp, incredibly clear audio of Vanessa and Tessa echoing through my living room filled the silent conference room. We have been actively consulting with elite family attorneys for over 6 months to legally protect my son from you. We waited patiently for the exact right moment to strike. We specifically held off on making any moves regarding this property until Colton filed the official asset separation paperwork this very morning. Tessa practically leaped out of her chair in the back row, her face burning a violent shade of red. That audio is taken completely out of context, she stammered loudly, her polished corporate lawyer persona completely shattering. I was just exaggerating to prove a point. We never actually coordinated anything illegal." Dana did not even look at her. She simply slid 2 printed pieces of paper across the table. "That is a highly fascinating defense, Tessa," Dana remarked dryly. "However, the first document is an email timestamp directly from your own attorney's office, confirming the asset separation was officially stamped at exactly 8:40 that exact morning. The second document is a text message from Brody, actively attempting to sell the disputed property the very next day, directly corroborating your mother's recorded confession of a coordinated, premeditated financial ambush." Thomas Vance closed his eyes and pinched the bridge of his nose. He knew his entire aggressive legal strategy had just been completely, irreparably decimated. His client was exposed as an adulterer, a liar, and a conspirator. Colton slammed his fists down onto the table, the heavy thud rattling the silver pen. His handsome face was contorted with pure, unadulterated rage. He glared at me with absolute hatred. "You think you are so incredibly clever," he hissed, his voice trembling with fury. "You think this little pile of papers actually changes the fundamental reality of our situation. I still make 5 times what you make. I will absolutely refuse to settle. I will petition the court to forcefully liquidate the house, extract every single ounce of my equity, and drag this miserable divorce out for 3 solid years. I will drown you in motions and legal fees that you will be begging me to let you sign that agreement just so you can afford to buy groceries." He was clinging desperately to his final, most brutal trump card, the war of attrition. He firmly believed he could still simply outspend me, financially starving me into submission no matter how much evidence I possessed. I sat perfectly still. I did not flinch at his threats. I felt the solid weight of the black leather briefcase resting securely by my feet. Dana calmly gathered her pristine folders, tapping their edges neatly against the polished wood. She looked directly into Colton's furious, bloodshot eyes with an expression of profound, terrifying calm. She did not reveal the final, devastating secret. She simply let his arrogant threats hang heavy and toxic in the air. "If you truly wish to fight to the bitter end regarding the division of assets and the exact timeline of events, Colton," Dana said, her voice dropping to a near whisper that commanded the absolute attention of every single person in the room, "then we are perfectly ready." Colton let out one last brittle laugh, still pretending he had leverage. He let out a harsh, grating sound, leaning back heavily in his plush leather executive chair. He firmly believed I was merely stalling for time. He was entirely convinced that I was playing desperate parlor tricks because I simply lacked the actual financial ammunition to go to war against him. He crossed his arms over his chest, a cruel, desperate smirk playing on his lips. "You think you are so incredibly brilliant, Skyla," he sneered, gesturing dismissively at the audio recorder and the damning vendor statements. "But all of this is just desperate noise. At the end of the day, you have absolutely nothing to your name. You have an outdated laptop and a handful of pitiful freelance gig contracts that barely cover your weekly groceries. If you truly want to play hardball, I will instruct Thomas to drag this legal procedure out for 3 solid years. I will drown you in so many endless motions and court fees that I will bleed you completely dry until you are literally living in your car." I did not interrupt his pathetic, arrogant tantrum. I did not raise my voice to defend my career or my worth. I simply reached down and lifted the sleek, completely opaque black leather briefcase onto my lap. The entire massive conference room fell into a sudden, highly tense silence. Even his aggressive attorney, Thomas Vance, leaned forward slightly, his eyes fixed on the silver clasps as they popped open with a sharp, echoing click. I reached inside the dark interior and pulled out a thick, heavy stack of watermarked, legally certified banking documents establishing the irrevocable blind trust. I did not say a single word. I did not dramatically announce the figure to the room. I merely slid the heavy folder across the polished wood until it rested directly in front of my husband. Colton frowned deeply, clearly annoyed by the quiet theatricality of the moment. He flipped the heavy cover open with a flick of his wrist. I watched his hazel eyes scan the first page. I watched the exact, beautiful moment his brain finally processed the certified account balance printed at the bottom of the sheet. All the color violently and instantly drained from his face, leaving his skin looking like gray ash. His breath hitched audibly in his throat. He blinked rapidly, staring at the bold black ink as if it were written in an entirely foreign language. Then, true to his incredibly toxic, narcissistic nature, the sheer shock instantly morphed into pure, unadulterated greed. He slammed his hand flat onto the document, looking up at me with wild eyes. "Where did this come from?" he demanded, his voice cracking slightly under the immense pressure. $5 million. You have been hiding $5 million from me, Thomas. Look at this right now. She is actively hiding massive marital assets. I am still her legal husband. I am absolutely entitled to 50% of every single penny in this account. That was the precise moment Dana Whitaker moved in for the final. Lethal legal strike. She did not raise her voice. She did not gloat. She simply reached into her own pristine file and pulled out a single, heavily stamped piece of paper. She placed it right next to the trust documents. "You really should pay much closer attention to your own legal filings. Colton," Dana said smoothly, her voice commanding the absolute attention of the entire room. "This is a certified copy of the aggressive asset separation petition you personally instructed your attorney to file. If you look closely at the top right corner, you will clearly see the official county clerk stamp. It was formally executed and entered into the public record at exactly 8:40 in the morning on Thursday." Dana then reached into her tailored blazer pocket and pulled out a small, laminated slip of paper. She laid it gently on top of the separation document, tapping it once with her perfectly manicured fingernail. "And this," Dana continued, her tone dripping with icy, undeniable triumph, "is a verified purchase receipt and the matching validation record for a state lottery jackpot ticket. Please read the time of purchase printed on the bottom aloud for everyone in the room. Colton." Colton stared down at the small slip. His lips moved soundlessly as he read the numbers. 2:07 in the afternoon. "You were in such a frantic, greedy rush to legally wall off your precious corporate bonus that you demanded the separation be finalized before the close of business," Dana explained, her words ringing with absolute, devastating finality. "By doing so, you legally severed the financial ties of your marriage that very morning. Therefore, any asset Skyla acquired after 8:40 in the morning is entirely, unequivocally, her own separate property. The $5 million jackpot she won at 2:07 in the afternoon belongs solely to her. You have absolutely no legal claim to a single dime. You built a flawless, impenetrable financial cage to lock her out, and you blindly locked yourself firmly on the outside." The collapse of his entire world was total and absolute. Colton sat completely frozen in his expensive chair, paralyzed by the catastrophic magnitude of his own horrific miscalculation. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Behind him, the arrogant peanut gallery completely shattered into pieces. Vanessa let out a loud, ugly, choking sob, burying her face in her trembling hands as the terrifying reality of losing her wealthy, philanthropic country club image crashed down upon her shoulders. Brody, rapidly realizing the disputed house was no longer a highly profitable real estate flip, but a massive, career-ending legal nightmare, physically took 3 steps backward, entirely retreating from the toxic family he had just tried so desperately to impress. Tessa was visibly hyperventilating, staring in sheer, unadulterated panic at the audio recorder resting on the table, suddenly realizing her active, recorded participation in this failed extortion plot was going to cost her her prestigious corporate law license. Colton finally looked up at me. The arrogant, powerful executive was entirely gone. In his place was a desperate, broken, terrified man. "Skyla, please," he begged. his voice reduced to a pathetic, trembling whisper. "We can fix this. We can talk about this in private. We are still a family. I am so sorry." I looked down at the man I had loved for 7 years. The man who had actively planned to destroy me, humiliate me, and leave me completely destitute on the street. I felt absolutely no urge to scream at him. I felt no desire to hurl vicious insults or seek a loud, messy, dramatic vengeance. I simply felt an overwhelming, beautiful sense of complete peace. "There is absolutely nothing left to talk about," I said, my voice completely steady, calm, and bone-chillingly cold. "I will not pay a single cent of your secret credit card debt. I will not protect your reputation when your corporate compliance office inevitably investigates your fraudulent vendor accounts. I will never trade my hard-earned peace for a fake, toxic reunion. From this exact second forward, every single word you wish to say to me will go directly through my attorney." I stood up, smoothing the front of my tailored charcoal suit. I left the terrifying pile of evidence sitting squarely on the table. I picked up my empty black briefcase, turned my back on the weeping, shattered family, and walked toward the heavy glass doors. I stepped out of the suffocating conference room and into the bright sunlit hallway. I had completely reclaimed control over my entire life. I had safely secured my financial independence. I held the absolute legal high ground, and I walked away with my dignity entirely intact. Colton Reeves was finally left sitting exactly where he belonged, permanently trapped in the devastating time trap he had so carefully built with his own 2 hands. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Let me know where you're listening from in the comments so we can connect. And if you enjoyed it, please subscribe to Zoe Revenge Stories and like the video so more people can hear this story.